Right now, as you are listening to these words, the very foundations of one of the most beautiful islands in the Mediterranean are quite literally liquefying. If you look at a map of Sicily, you see a rugged, sun-drenched landscape defined by ancient history and volcanic power. But beneath that picturesque surface, something catastrophic is happening. And according to the latest reports from geological engineers on the ground, we have officially passed the point of no return. We are not just talking about a few rocks falling onto a highway or a localized mudslide after a heavy rain. We are witnessing a geological phenomenon where the ground is collapsing inward, creating a subterranean vacuum that is swallowing infrastructure, historical heritage sites, and entire hillsides. The experts sent to mitigate the damage have returned with a chilling conclusion: it cannot be stopped. This is a deep dive into the silent disintegration of Sicily, a crisis far worse than what is being shared in the mainstream headlines, and a glimpse into a future where the earth beneath us simply decides to let go. To understand why this is happening, we have to look past the surface-level news stories that mention heavy rainfall. While water is the trigger, the real culprit is a lethal combination of ancient plate tectonics, crumbling clay stratas, and a human failure to respect the fluid nature of the Sicilian soil. Engineers who have been surveying the central and northern regions of the island, particularly around the Enna and Messina provinces, are reporting deep-seated gravitational slope deformations. This is a scientific way of saying that entire mountains are slowly sliding toward the sea, not as a single piece, but as a crumbling mess of debris that is folding in on itself. Think of it like a massive sinkhole that spans several miles, where the center of the land is sinking while the edges are buckling upward. When these engineers tried to drill boreholes to stabilize the ground with concrete pillars, they found that the earth was moving so fast that it was snapping their steel reinforcements like toothpicks. The scale of this is hard to wrap your head around unless you see the data. In some sectors, the ground is moving at a rate of several centimeters per day. That might sound slow to you, but in geological terms, that is a sprint. It is a pace that makes permanent infrastructure impossible to maintain. We are seeing bridges that were built to last a century shifting out of alignment in just 6 months. We are seeing cracks in the earth that are so deep, light cannot reach the bottom. And the most terrifying part is the inward collapse. Usually, a landslide moves outward and downward. The internal support structures of the earth, layers of sand and clay, are being washed out from the inside by redirected underground aquifers. This creates massive underground voids. When the weight of the surface becomes too much, the land falls inward. It is a self-devouring cycle that creates more instability with every inch it drops. The engineers are calling this a terminal geological event. Why terminal? Because the sheer volume of material in motion is too great for any man-made intervention. You cannot build a wall high enough or a pillar deep enough to stop a mountain that has decided to move. The sheer physics of the situation are overwhelming. We are talking about billions of tons of earth in motion. To try and stop it would be like trying to hold back the tide with a plastic bucket. This realization has sent shockwaves through the scientific community, because it forces us to confront a reality we usually ignore. The Earth is not a static platform. It is a dynamic, changing system, and in Sicily, the system is breaking down. One of the most concerning aspects that isn't being talked about enough is the impact on the ancient towns perched on these hills. Many of these settlements have stood for 1,000 years. They survived wars, volcanic eruptions from Etna, and economic collapses. But they cannot survive the ground simply vanishing from beneath them. In places like Centuripe or the smaller hamlets in the Nebrodi Mountains, the very streets are splitting open. You can see into the basements of houses from the middle of the road. People are waking up to find that their front doors won't open, because the entire frame of their house is tilted 5 degrees overnight. The psychological toll on these communities is immense. Imagine the place where your family has lived for generations becoming a literal trap. But why now? Why is this happening with such intensity at this specific moment in history? This is where the science gets really interesting and a bit frightening. Scientists have identified a shift in the hydraulic pressure within the Sicilian tectonic microplates. As the African plate continues its slow-motion collision with the Eurasian plate, it puts incredible stress on the Sicilian landmass. Normally, these fractures stay dry, but with the recent unpredictable weather patterns, we are seeing intense bursts of rainfall that dump months' worth of water in just a few hours. This water doesn't just run off the surface. It finds those deep tectonic fractures and lubes them. It turns the deep clay layers into a slick, soapy slurry. This creates a slip plane. Once that plane is lubricated, gravity takes over, and there is absolutely nothing that can produce enough friction to stop it. Engineers have tried using advanced geogrids and massive drainage systems to siphon the water away, but the inward collapse makes this nearly impossible. It creates new bowls and depressions that trap even more water, accelerating the process. It is a feedback loop of destruction. The official reports are trying to remain calm to avoid mass panic, but if you look at the technical data being shared in engineering forums, the tone is one of pure desperation. They are no longer talking about how to save the roads. They are talking about which areas need to be abandoned entirely because they are scientifically unsafe for human habitation. This brings up a massive question about the future of civil engineering in a changing world. If we can't stop a landslide in Sicily, what does that mean for other coastal and mountainous regions across the globe? This island is becoming a laboratory for what happens when the environment reaches a breaking point. We are seeing the limits of our technology. We often think of ourselves as the masters of the landscape, capable of tunneling through mountains and reclaiming land from the sea. But the Sicilian collapse is a humbling reminder that we are guests on a very thin crust of rock. The inward nature of the collapse also presents a unique challenge for satellite monitoring. Traditional GPS sensors on the surface can tell you that a point has moved from A to B, but when the ground is collapsing inward, it creates a complex 3D deformation pattern that is incredibly difficult to map accurately in real time. By the time the sensors show a major shift, the structural integrity of the entire area has already been compromised. This led to a situation last month, where a major arterial road was declared safe in the morning and became a gaping chasm by sunset. There were no warning signs on the surface until the very last second, because the failure was happening 300 feet down. Let's talk about the specific chemistry of the soil there, because this is a detail that often gets skipped. A lot of the soil in the affected regions is rich in smectite clays. For those who aren't geology buffs, smectite is a type of clay that has a high capacity for swelling. When it gets wet, it can expand to several times its original volume. When it dries, it shrinks and cracks. This constant expansion and contraction over decades has turned the subsurface of Sicily into a giant, unstable sponge. Now, with the increased frequency of extreme weather, this sponge is being pushed beyond its elastic limit. It has lost its ability to snap back. Instead, it is simply shearing. When engineers talk about the landslide being worse than reported, this is what they mean. They are seeing the very molecular structure of the ground failing. There is also the factor of the underground infrastructure. Sewage pipes and forgotten tunnels from various eras of Sicilian history are all breaking simultaneously. Every time a pipe bursts, it injects thousands of gallons of pressurized water directly into the most unstable parts of the slope. It's like injecting a lubricant directly into a hinge. These urban landslides are far more dangerous because they involve a cocktail of soil, debris, and high-pressure utility failures. The engineers on site have described hearing a low-frequency rumbling that doesn't stop. It's the sound of the earth grinding against itself deep underground. It's a sound that signifies a total loss of equilibrium. As we move forward, the focus is shifting from how do we fix this to how do we move people out. This is a difficult transition for any government or scientific body to make. It is an admission of defeat against the elements, but the data doesn't lie. The inward collapse is creating a topography that is unrecognizable from the maps created even 5 years ago. Entire groves of ancient olive trees, some hundreds of years old, are being tilted at 45-degree angles. Their roots ripped from the earth as the ground beneath them simply gives way. These trees are symbols of the land's permanence, and seeing them fall is perhaps the most visual indicator of the severity of this crisis. The technical term for what is happening to the larger mountain ranges is deep-seated gravitational slope deformation, or DSGSD. While regular landslides involve the top layer of soil, a DSGSD involves the entire mountain massif. The scale is so massive that it affects the local gravity field slightly, and the movement is driven by the sheer weight of the rock itself. In Sicily, these deformations are being accelerated by seismic tremors. Even a small earthquake, one that wouldn't cause a building to fall, can be enough to trigger a massive shift in a DSGSD that is already on the verge of failure. It is like a house of cards, where the table is being constantly shaken. What makes the Sicilian situation unique is the complexity of the geology. You have volcanic rock from Etna's ancient flows, sitting on top of soft sedimentary layers, sitting on top of tectonic fault lines. It is a geological layer cake of instability. For years, the vegetation and a relatively stable climate kept everything in balance. But that balance has been tipped. Now that the movement has started, there is no known engineering method to stop it. Grouting, which involves pumping liquid concrete into the ground to fill voids, is failing because the voids are growing faster than they can be filled. It's like trying to fill a leaking bucket with a dropper. We also have to consider the economic impact, which further complicates the scientific response. Tourism and agriculture are the lifeblood of Sicily. When roads disappear and towns are evacuated, the resources needed to fund the complex engineering solutions also vanish. It is a double-edged sword. The more the land collapses, the less money there is to try and monitor or mitigate the collapse. This has led some experts to refer to these areas as sacrifice zones, places where the cost of intervention is so high and the chance of success so low that the only logical choice is to let nature take its course. But the scientists aren't giving up on understanding it. They are now using drone-mounted LiDAR to create high-resolution 3D models of the collapsing areas. These models show that the inward collapse is creating a series of tiered terraces, almost like a giant staircase leading down into the earth. This suggests that the collapse is happening in stages, with each level of the Earth's crust failing in sequence. By studying these patterns, researchers hope to at least predict which house or which road will be next, even if they can't save it. This predictive modeling is the new frontier of disaster management, a move from prevention to tactical retreat. You expect a catastrophe of this magnitude to be loud and sudden, like a volcano or a massive flood. But this is a quiet, relentless devouring of the landscape. You can stand in a field and not see anything moving. But if you look at a fence line, you'll see it's 10 feet away from where it was a week ago. The earth is folding in on itself with a terrifying, stoic persistence. The inward collapse means that the debris isn't even moving away. It's just packing down, getting denser and heavier, which ironically puts even more pressure on the layers below, causing them to fail even faster. The gravity of the situation in Sicily serves as a massive wake-up call for the rest of the world. We are entering an era where the geological stability we took for granted is no longer a given. The combination of tectonic pressure, poor soil composition, and extreme weather is a recipe for disaster that isn't unique to the Mediterranean. However, Sicily is the canary in the coal mine. It is where all these factors have converged first and most violently. The engineer's conclusion that it cannot be stopped isn't just a statement about Sicily. It's a statement about the limits of human intervention in the face of planetary-scale geological shifts. As the ground continues to settle inward, the very shape of the island is changing. This isn't just a news story about a bad landslide. It's a chapter in the geological history of the Earth being written in real time. We are watching the literal reshaping of a landscape, a process that usually takes millions of years, compressed into a single human lifetime. It's a somber reminder that for all our concrete and steel, we live at the mercy of the ground beneath our feet. And when that ground decides to move, when it decides to collapse inward and reclaim itself, there is very little we can do but watch, learn, and move out of the way. The local reports from engineers on the ground are becoming more frequent and more dire. They've begun to notice that the internal collapses are creating subterranean chimneys, vertical shafts that allow surface water to bypass the topsoil and hit the deep bedrock immediately. This bypass mechanism is something they've never seen on this scale before. It essentially turns the mountain into a hollow shell. Visualize a giant sandcastle where the middle has been hollowed out. Eventually, the weight of the towers will make the whole thing implode. This is exactly what the data is showing for parts of the northern Sicilian ranges. Furthermore, the impact on the local water table is catastrophic. As the ground collapses inward, it crushes the natural aquifers that have supplied Sicilian towns with fresh water for millennia. The geological pipes of the earth are being pinched shut or redirected into deep, unreachable fissures. This means that even if the towns on the surface were stable, they would soon face an existential water crisis. The collapse is not just destroying the land, it's destroying the life support systems of the island. Engineers are now struggling to find new ways to tap into water sources that haven't been contaminated or diverted by the moving earth. What is particularly striking is the reaction of the international scientific community. Teams from across Europe and even North America are now looking at Sicily as a primary case study. They are bringing in sophisticated satellite radar called INSAR, which can measure ground movement from space with millimeter precision. The data from INSAR has confirmed the engineers' worst fears. The movement is not localized to the visible landslides. The entire tectonic block seems to be in a state of flux. This scale of movement suggests that the triggers are much deeper than just rainfall. We are looking at a fundamental readjustment of the crust in this region. In the middle of this, the residents are caught in a limbo of uncertainty. There is a sense of grief for a landscape that is disappearing. In Sicily, the land is more than just dirt. It's history, it's olive oil, it's wine, it's the legacy of ancestors. To see it inward collapse, to see it succumb to a process that engineers say is unstoppable. The engineers themselves, usually people of cold facts and hard numbers, have spoken about the uncanny nature of the phenomenon. One described it as watching the island sigh and settle into the sea. The technical challenge of even monitoring this is immense. When the ground is moving this much, you can't exactly go out and plant sensors easily. Every time they try to set up a monitoring station, the ground shifts and the station becomes useless or gets swallowed. They are now having to rely on expensive long-range laser scanning and high-altitude drones just to keep track of the rate of the collapse. This is turning into one of the most expensive and complex geological monitoring operations in history. And it's all for a situation that they have already admitted they can't fix. It's a race to gather as much data as possible before the landscape changes beyond recognition. As we look at the maps provided by these engineering teams, we see huge red zones where human activity is now strictly prohibited. These red zones are expanding. What started as small pockets of instability are merging into massive corridors of collapse. The highway systems that connect the major cities of Sicily are being diverted and re-diverted. But even the new routes are starting to show the telltale signs of inward settling. Cracks are appearing in the asphalt of roads that are only months old. It's a relentless, creeping tide of geological failure. One of the most haunting discoveries made by the engineers is the impact on the ancient catacombs and underground structures that Sicily is famous for. These historical sites, which have stood for centuries, are being squeezed by the shifting earth. In some cases, the weight of the inward collapsing soil is pulverizing the limestone of these ancient structures, turning them into dust. This is a scientific and archaeological tragedy. We are losing data about our past at the same time we are losing the land of the present. The engineers have had to seal off many of these sites because they are now nothing more than dangerous voids waiting to collapse. If we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, the Sicilian landslide crisis is a masterclass in the complexity of earth sciences. It shows how meteorology, hydrology, geology, and human engineering are all inextricably linked. You cannot change one without affecting the others. The water movement triggered the clay swelling. The clay swelling triggered the slope failure. And the slope failure is now being exacerbated by the sheer weight of our own infrastructure. It is a perfect storm of geological factors that has created an unstoppable force. The engineer's report ends with a stark warning for other regions with similar geological profiles. Places with high clay content, tectonic activity, and increasing weather volatility need to start preparing now. The Sicily model of collapse is something that could be replicated in many parts of the world. We need to stop thinking about the ground as a permanent, unchanging foundation and start seeing it as a fluid, responsive system. The tragedy in Sicily is that we learned this lesson too late to save the landscape. Now, as the sun sets over the craggy peaks of the Sicilian interior, the movement continues. It's a silent, invisible process that only becomes apparent when a road snaps or a house tilts. But the engineers know. Their sensors are chirping, their models are flashing red, and their maps are being redrawn every single day. They are witnesses to a geological event that is far worse than what's being reported, a whole island in the middle of an inward collapse that cannot be stopped. It's a humbling, terrifying reminder of the power of the planet we call home. We can build, we can plan, and we can study, but in the end, the Earth has the final word. And right now, Sicily is feeling the weight of that word in every settling inch of its soil. The fact that the inward collapse is happening so rapidly points to a breakdown in the internal friction of the mountain. In physics, internal friction is what keeps a pile of sand in a cone shape. If you reduce that friction, the pile flattens. The internal friction of the mountains is being decimated by the saturation of deep clay layers. This isn't just a surface slide. The bones of the land are soft. Because the core of these hills is losing its structural integrity. They are literally imploding under their own gravity. This is why the engineers are so certain it can't be stopped. You can't re-inject friction into the heart of a mountain. As scientific discoveries go, this is a somber one. It's the discovery of a new type of landscape-scale failure. We are seeing how human-induced changes to the environment can trigger deep-seated geological processes that were previously dormant. The lesson of Sicily is one of humility. It shows that our impact on the planet isn't just on the atmosphere or the oceans, but on the very stability of the crust itself. The ongoing monitoring will provide invaluable data for future generations. But for the people of Sicily, that data comes at a very high price. The island is changing, folding in on itself, and all we can do is watch and record the disintegration of one of the world's most beautiful places. This is the reality of the Sicilian collapse, a slow-motion catastrophe that is far deeper and far more permanent than anyone ever expected. The ground is moving. The engineers are shouting the warning, and the world is finally starting to listen to the silent crumbling of Sicily. Moving forward, the scientific community must use this data to rethink urban planning entirely. We can no longer assume the ground is a static variable. In a world of shifting climates and tectonic pressures, the very earth beneath us is a living, reacting participant in our civilization. Sicily is the proof that when we ignore the science of the ground, we do so at our own peril. The collapse continues, inward and down, a relentless march of physics that serves as a final, unarguable testament to the power of the natural world.